Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast, a post-game reaction podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Ben Wolk with me, as always. And, wow, Ben, we've got quite a game to recap. Number 5, Georgia, goes to Austin and beats number 1, Texas 30-15. One of the wilder games I feel like I've seen in person. Georgia goes up 23-0, totally loses the momentum in the third quarter, does enough to win this game. There's so much to talk about with this game, and I think that we got to start with the defensive effort in that first half. I mean, the defense did such a good job getting after Quinn Ewers, and then a little bit later, Arch Manning wound up having 7 sacks in that game. I thought the defense put the offense in position to just barely do enough, and Georgia winds up beating the number 1 team on the road, which is the first time Georgia has ever done that in a true road game, gone and beaten the number 1 team.
Wow. I mean, you're right. It's one of the crazier games I've seen, one of the crazier games I've been at. I can say that definitively because I've never had to dodge water bottles and beer cans the way that I did tonight down on the field for that one. But electric environment, to your point, I think that you have to start with talking about the defense in this one. For everything that we've talked about, everything that we've written about. I mean, I think in the rapid reaction after the Mississippi State game, I gave them a D+ on the defensive side of the ball. I was very critical of defensive coaches and the coaching section of that as well. And for them to turn around against the number 1 team with the offense that everybody talks about being so potent, just a huge win, not just from a getting another top 10 win standpoint, not just from beating the number 1 team, not just from kind of disproving what people started to think about you, but there's so much less stress and pressure and anxiety for the rest of the season because they were able to pull out this win. And so, yeah, I'm sure we're going to get into all the details of all the things that we saw because I can't quite wrap my head around everything that I saw out there today.
It was one of the weirder games I've seen, and I do want to say this. I said I was going to say this when we first started. Both of us were wrong. Both of us picked Texas. Kip Adams, who's not on this show, also picked Texas. If you looked at the media predictions that I put together, there was something like 27, 28 picks in there, and there were 3 Georgia picks. So there's 3 people. I can't remember who they were off the top of my head.
Credit to them.
Did a very good job of picking Georgia because I just had a lot of doubts, and I still have a lot of questions about this offense, and we can talk about that. But, I mean, the defense came through, and I had put this on the Junkyard. I think that was on Friday. Someone was talking about the pass rush, and I said, if you're going to win this game, you have to affect Quinn Ewers. Well, they affected Quinn Ewers so much that Arch Manning came in this game. I mean, that was – and then Quinn Ewers comes back, and to Quinn's credit, he played a lot better in the second half. I do think Georgia's defense kind of got worn down, but – looking at the numbers, I think that Texas converted 2 third downs, 2 of 14. Now, some of those later were kind of like Georgia in the second half of Alabama where they knew they were going for 4th down. I don't know if you felt this way, Ben, and we can talk about this for a second, but some of us that were sitting up here watching the second half were going, Georgia is an Alabama spot from that game earlier, and Texas is in Georgia spot where all of a sudden you're kind of looking going, the momentum is shifting in this game. And to Georgia's credit, it did shift, but Georgia got the last laugh.
The momentum definitely shifted, and there's one moment in particular I know we'll talk about that was one of the more momentum-shifting moments I've ever experienced in any football game ever. But I think to your point, I mean, Georgia's defensive line and just defensive front in general created more pressure. And quite frankly, not even just the defensive front. I mean, it was Dalen Everett coming off the edge that created a strip sack in the first half and recovered his own strip as well that he's making a play. So it really, I mean, that's a credit to Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann for dialing up some exotic blitzes and getting creative with how they were doing certain things. And they definitely did that in this one. I mean, I think a big thing for this and what we, if you look at what's the difference between this this Texas game and what we saw in the Alabama game. And I think that the difference to me in this game and that game, when you look at it at the full 60, is that Alabama had Ryan Williams, who is a very, very special player. And I think that and Jalen Milroe in that game as well, I'll give him credit. I know that Alabama has struggled. They've lost 2 games, haven't been as sharp as they were in that Georgia game. But I think that to beat Georgia, you cannot rely on genius scheme. I mean, Sarkisian's the best that there is. I think that Texas, what they needed was a quarterback or a wide receiver to come over and take over the game, start doing things that other people cannot do. Neither of those things happened at any point in the game. And I think that because of that, Georgia got real comfortable. I mean, Texas ended up throwing 49 times in this game. And I think that when you let a very healthy Micah Williams, clearly by the way that he played today, you look at Jalen Walker, who was a man possessed. Damon Wilson had some moments where there was just nobody stopping him. When you get those guys with their ears pinned back, being able to know, all right, this is going to be a passing play, and they know that the opposing quarterback is not a dynamic runner. I think that this Georgia defense is just going to look a lot different in that style of matchup.
All right, let's talk about by far the weirdest part of this game. That was the third quarter. Jahdae Barron and Arian Smith fighting for a ball out on the sideline. Barron makes the interception, takes off, has a really good return, makes a couple cuts, gets to, I think, about the Georgia 8, excuse me, and there's a flag. Initially, they call off defensive pass interference on Barron, eliminates the play. Texas's fans totally lose it when they see the replay, which, to be fair, I understand why they were frustrated because I do think it was the wrong call. And they throw trash on the field. There's several minutes of delay. You know, Steve Sarkisian walks out there at one point to basically tell his fans to behave and stop. There's this kind of like mayhem pandemonium of like, okay, we're waiting on this. And then the officials come out and say, oh, we're picking up that flag, by the way, and giving into the mob, Ben. What is that teaching our youth to be able to act that way? I will say this in all sincerity. That was not defensive pass interference. If anything, it was offensive pass interference on Arian. But I've never seen them, especially after a delay where you could argue Texas deserved a penalty because of how the fans were reacting, that, you know, it winds up swinging totally in Texas' direction. And to Texas' credit, they go and score after that. But I don't get your take. You were down there. I don't know if you were in that end zone where it was happening. What happened? What did you get to see as the trash, the debris was raining down on this field?
It was pure chaos. And everybody who knows me knows that I am an agent of chaos. So as this started happening, I know how a lot of people get in these situations. You know, you need to react better. You need to not get emotional, you know, whatever. We've all seen situations where there's been trash on the field because of a bad call. I think that the most famous one recently was Tennessee Ole Miss a couple of years ago to stop the game for a period of time.
How was there no golf balls when Scotty Scheffler was? That was just, if you're gonna do it, guys, y'all got to do better.
I was gonna say there were too many water bottles. I would say there was probably not enough beer cans. I feel like if there had been more beer cans, the environment might have been a little bit higher from a decibel standpoint. But I was. Admittedly, I was like a kid in the candy store as it was happening. My head was on a swivel. I was standing down there with Brooks Austin actually down in the end zone, and we both immediately went head on a swivel and were calling out to other people to get head on a swivel because I think that we realized earlier than most what was about to happen. There also needs to be a psychological study done on SEC football fans when they see somebody else throw an item onto the field, because what happened was a single water bottle got thrown to like the 30-yard line. And it's laying there, so they have to stop everything for them to be able to run out and go get it. And all it took was for that brief stoppage with that one water bottle sitting on the 30 for everybody else to say, I've got an item, why not throw it? And it was chaos. I mean, I have a great video of it on my Twitter account, not to self-plug, but go check out the video because it's a good look at the end zone where it happened in and just the chaos that was happening. And then, to me, the fact I still can't even wrap my mind around what happened after that. Like, essentially what happened, there was a stoppage in play. They had to clean up the trash out of the end zone. During all of that, the officiating crew huddled up. They'd probably seen on the Jumbotron 9 times that it probably wasn't pass interference. Without saying anything to either sideline, they then just go and report it to the entire stadium. And it was mayhem on the Georgia sideline for a second. I'm sure it was on the Texas sideline. But I think that, Georgia had just spent all this time in the break planning what they were going to do on that, on the next offensive play. And it was just like something I had never seen. Technically, I guess they did what you're allowed to do. You as an officiating crew can get together and say, hey, I think that we missed that one. And that's what they did. The weird part of it is that huddle up from that crew never happens if there's not trash all over the field that's resulting in everybody having to, clean it up. And then it gave them the time to figure things out. So I went through a lot of emotions during that moment. At first it was fear, then it was just pure unadulterated excitement. And then it was like, what the hell is going on in this football stadium right now? And credit to Georgia. The fact that they were able to respond, I thought that was the moment where it was like, you cannot mentally recover from this moment the way that Texas is now seemingly starting to move the football, even though when you go look back on it, it's the missed kickoff by Peyton Woodring, and then that play are the only scoring possessions that they have the entire game. So it probably wasn't as close as it felt like it was getting there for a second. But in that moment, I thought that was the moment where I was like, all right, Georgia is not going to win this football game.
Yeah, I was concerned, especially when they went down and scored a touchdown and they got the 2-point conversion. And like Fox Mulder says in the comments, isn't that a non-reviewable call? That was part of what was confusing. And again, like Ben said, they didn't announce, hey, we're going to talk about this. It was just like, oh, by the way, we had this conversation while they were picking up the trash. How close did you get? Were you close at all to getting hit by anyone?
I did. I don't want to even throw his name out there since he was the one that got wrecked by a water bottle. But I was standing right next to someone who covers Georgia, great guy, got wrecked by a water bottle, hit his camera. And that's when it kind of stopped being funny. Like, that's when you start realizing, like, all right, people are genuinely in danger here. I mean, not everybody has the cat-like reflexes that I had down there. I knew that I felt like I was pretty safe dodging everything. But I said this while I was down there. I wanted to go into full punt returner mode and just start fielding water bottles out there in the middle of the
just
field,
waving for a fair catch.
Yeah, I didn't want to get escorted off the premises, so I decided not to do that.
Probably a good decision. And Kirby in the post game to ESPN, part of his quote was, "Nobody believed us, and then they tried to rob us with calls in this place. And these guys are so resilient." Did you not?
I had not seen the quote actually said. I had heard that like people were saying like Kirby said they tried to rob us, but I didn't realize he actually used the word rob.
Because then in the post game, and folks, I would encourage y'all to go to Dogs 24/7 YouTube. Very much more reserved and was basically like, I don't really want to comment on that. Because I think someone got him after he said that and said, yeah, don't do that. You just cost yourself a lot of money by doing that. Ben, let's take a quick break and we're going to come back. I want to talk specifically about the Georgia offense. We talked about the defense. There was a lot to still be concerned about with what the offense did. And also, I want to make sure before we get out of here and talk about Elijah Griffin, who committed on Friday. Guys, we're going to talk about the offense, but Shaheed Huckabee, can y'all revisit y'all's picks for the game? I told everybody during the week, hey, if I'm wrong, I will own it. I had Texas win 27-20. I was wrong. Ben, you had a 2-possession game. So I would argue you were wronger than I was.
Well, and you know that I had said, I was like, I'm going to go back to my preseason score predictions only because I felt like I trusted my preseason picks more than my midseason picks. And then I proceeded to change to a midseason pick, and I already had Texas winning preseason, but then I had Texas winning 31-20 in this one. So I don't know that I could have been more wrong.
Some of the stats for the offense, because I want to talk about the offense play in this game. Carson Beck, 23 of 41, 175 yards, 0 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. I got to be honest, I didn't realize he did not throw a touchdown pass in this game. Trevor Etienne, 19 carries, 87 yards, 3 touchdowns, an average of 4.6 carries per yards per attempt, I should say. Oscar Delp, 2 receptions, 45 yards. 45 yards was the leading receiver for Georgia, but they got a lot of different guys involved. Excuse me. Dominic Lovett, 4 receptions, 35 yards. Arian Smith, 6 receptions, 32 yards. He deserves so much credit after that touchdown we're talking about, after the mayhem. He catches like a 21-yard pass on 3rd down where, I'll be honest, Ben, I don't think if they don't convert that, I think Texas wins this game.
Completely agree. Yeah, I mean, I would say that the Arian play on that possession and the Oscar Delp play on the creative design from Mike Bobo, where they just kind of had a lot of action. I think Kirby Smart even said post game he didn't even know what to call it, but like a double reverse flea flicker type of play where they hit Oscar Delp. And I thought that was the moment that showed me, all right, this Georgia football team is not going to let anything crazy, impact their mindset in this game. And yeah, a lot of credit to Arian Smith, a lot of credit to Oscar Delp. But I will say Kirby Smart, I think his exact phrasing after the game was, it's getting to the point where our inability to catch the football is almost comical. I might have missed a word here or there, but that was the general phrasing. And he was doing a lot of Carson Beck protection during that press conference. And I think that when I go back and watch the tape and others go back and watch the tape, they're probably going to see that there were so many situations that Georgia's receivers just dropped some easy ones. And I think that's where it's probably getting frustrating is Carson hasn't been as sharp as he needs to be this season. But it feels like when he gives his guys layups, there have been so many drops on some of these layups. Like, I mean, London Humphreys had one, Dylan Bell had one early. And sometimes it feels like, oh, it's just one drop. But situationally, it's huge. Like if London Humphreys, and again, I'm not picking on London Humphreys. I think that he's going to have an exceptional Georgia career, and he's been great up to this point. Not someone that I've actually pointed to saying I think it's going like Georgia needs to lean on more. But he had one where Carson's been struggling to get into a rhythm, and they finally run a play where it looks like you're getting a wide open London Humphreys, and he starts to move before he actually brings it in, and all of a sudden it's on the turf, and now things are looking a little bit dicey. And so I think that's where it comes in. It's just the situational drops are probably impacting Carson Beck's confidence and chemistry with his guys. And also, he just hasn't been the best version of himself. And so you need to maximize the Carson Beck that you have right now, and all of the drops are making that really, really hard to do.
And there's been talk about Carson not being 100%. I thought it was interesting during the Mississippi State game when I went back and rewatched it. The broadcast said, like, Carson's like, yeah, I'm not 100%, but none of our guys are. And you can't help but wonder if that's affecting his game some. But he didn't play great. 3 interceptions in this game, 3 interceptions in that loss at Alabama. He's going to have to play better on the road. I want to see if you were as struck by this. I think it was more so in the first half. We saw a little bit more in the second half. Georgia just was so pass heavy. And I was sitting there going, why are you guys not trying to run Trevor? At one point, Trevor was averaging like 9 yards a carry. And I get, that they must have liked what they saw against the Texas defense and that they probably wanted to keep those running backs fresh in the second half, especially with the lead. But I felt like they got real pass happy when there were opportunities to run. And again, you look at the final numbers, they wound up running 30 times compared to 41 passes. That's not crazy. But in the first half, when it felt like, Georgia had such an advantage in the field position battle. In that first half, Georgia's average starting field position was its own 44. Texas was its own 22. That's pretty significant for drive after drive. And they had 3 or 4 drives in that first half that started in Texas territory. Part of the problem when we talk about this offense, I think only 2 of them ended in touchdowns. Like, you got short field, you got to go down and score, especially on the road, especially against a very dangerous Texas team. But I want to get your thoughts. Were you struck at all by, sort of the run pass of it all really in that first half when it just felt like this offense, they could have landed some knockout punches against definitely a bewildered Texas team because of how this game started, and Georgia let Texas hang around.
Well, not to steal a Kirbyism that probably makes people roll their eyes, from time to time, but I do think that there was some of the extension of the run in the passing game where you look at the number and it says he threw 41 passes. I think of the 23 completions, I bet you a heavy percentage of that are the ones that they sort of think of as, the quick screens to Dylan Bell or Trevor Etienne or Arian Smith, or maybe some of the quick stuff that they do with the tight ends when they have some motion. I think that they think of some of those plays more as run plays than pass plays. So I do think that was a part of it. I do think when Carson Beck's only completing 56% of his passes, and what he's typically known for is completing, upwards of 70% of his passes, it does make you wonder, why are you going to the air as much as you are, especially like you said early, Trevor Etienne was so sharp, and it felt like every time that he was getting touches. Now, I think some of that stuff was pretty creative. Like, I think they got a little exotic motion that they did where he got it deep down, or on his second touchdown run, and then on his first touchdown run, I thought that they just schemed it up pretty well, getting him out to the perimeter, and then he beat his man to the spot. And so, I think that I'm not going to sit here, especially since I was on the field level, I'm not going to sit here and be overly critical of the offensive play calling and how they approached all of that. I mean, I think that something needs to change with the efficiency of the passing game when they are trying to take shots down the field. And that's not just the 50-yard bombs where, there's an overthrow or whatever. I'm talking about the 15 to 20 yarders, the one that Dylan Bell drops on the second play of the game, the one that London Humphreys dropped that I referenced earlier in the game. It's like, those are the types of situations that Georgia has to sharpen up to be able to win these games in a more stress-free way. But I will also say, if you had told me at the beginning of the week that Georgia was going to win this game 30-15, I'd be pretty hard pressed to sit up here with a straight face on a podcast and talk about things that Carson Beck or Mike Bobo or anybody else didn't do well, because Georgia might have made it look relatively easy. I know maybe they might have made it look harder than it needed to look today.
The defense a lot of the time made it look easy.
Yeah, they made it look easy enough, but it's not easy to win a game like this and go into Texas and play a Texas team like that and win 30-15 and never really feel challenged, throughout the game. It's hard to sit here and be too critical.
Final thoughts before we talk about recruiting real quick. Kind of what Ben just said. I mean, you won the game. It was a little bit tense in that fourth quarter where Texas kept trying, but I mean, Georgia, again, the success they had on third down, the defense, I think this defense deserves so much credit because a lot of people, and myself included, were very critical after that Mississippi State game. They showed up. The pass rush was great. You get another week now, bye week, where you get Tate Ratledge back, hopefully. He was warming up. Hopefully Jordan Hall's able to make his debut in that Florida game. Well-timed. You beat the number one team in the country in their house. Things to correct, but you got to be feeling good going into a bye week before you go down to Jacksonville. Final thoughts?
I'm going to actually answer Frank D'Amico's question real quick here, because he said not going to talk about officiating. I know that we've alluded to the one situation, which I think was probably the egregious one that was just such an emotional moment, that's the one that people are probably pointing to. I mean, again, we have talked about that call specifically, but I think that ultimately they got the call right, just the nature of how it got to that call and everything that happened prior to it that led to them having the time to make that call. It's one of the more outrageous situations I've ever seen, and I'm sure you're going to see statements from Greg Sankey and the SEC officiating crews and probably Georgia's. I think Georgia's president and other people have been asked about it already down on the field, and I don't know if they've commented on it or anything like that, but I'm sure you're going to hear people comment on those types of things. I think that everybody can look at that situation at face value and say it was one of the more ridiculous moments that anybody's seen in a football stadium. So I don't think there's going to be much objection there from anyone. The other officiating, I get it. People are going to get up in arms about refereeing. I always am going to be in the camp of there's 150 other plays that happen. I can't get too caught up in one moment. I think that the targeting calls are probably what are going to get people a little bit frustrated, because Dan Jackson, Janelle Aguero, they're both going to be out for the first half of the Florida game now. And I think you might have had a better look at this than me. The Dan Jackson one looked a little bit more questionable than Janelle Aguero's. I don't know. I guess either of them could have gone either way, but what did you think about those two?
I thought Dan Jackson one was questionable. I'll be honest, I was busy trying to write whatever I posted for the instant takeaways. I don't know if any of it made any sense, Ben. I didn't get a great look at the Janelle Aguero one, but I even think, too, there was a KJ Bolden defensive pass interference in the end zone that when I saw it in the replay, I thought it was kind of weak. But yeah, there was officiating. I get Kirby being fired up. He's going to donate a nice check to the conference to kind of help with he got it off his chest, and they're gonna make him pay for it.
I will say on the Janelle Aguero one, I thought I had a pretty good look on that. I know people get real frustrated with targeting, and we all know we've all been talking about it for years and years. It's not a perfect rule. There's frustrating moments with it. I think when you lower the crown of your helmet and there's a little bit of a launch, you are leaving yourself up for the possibility of it. And I think Janelle Aguero's was a perfect example where it's probably not targeting, but if you're going crown of the helmet and you catch any part of their helmet whatsoever, there's a chance that you're going to get called for that. I do think the touchdown Trevor Etienne punched in before the fourth down where they punched it in, I do think that he was in on that. That was one where I think they missed it. I think ultimately that helped Georgia more than anything because it allowed Georgia to burn an extra 40 to 50 seconds off the clock before getting another one in. So yeah, an imperfect night from the officiating crew, who is definitely going to have to answer to things. But aside from the trash penalty overturn chaos, I wouldn't say that there was one. And I'll say this: I don't think that the pass interference that was called initially on the Texas defensive back warranted trash on the field. There are bad calls, and that was a bad call where you boo for a play or two plays and then you move on. It was not a trash on the field moment. But as we learned, and as Kirby Smart said, the precedent was set. Who knows? We might see a lot more trash on SEC football fields in the future.
Ken Feinberg asked about the onside kick. That was not the call. Kirby said that Peyton Woodring mishit that kick, so that was not intended, and that made more sense. Ben, let's try to get out of here pretty quickly. I know they're getting ready to close down, but let's talk about it.
I want to jump in just because you bring the Woodring thing up, because it is crazy to me. He is as good of a Georgia kicker as I've ever seen. And I'm sure that some people that have been watching Georgia football for decades longer than I have are probably going to push back and say something outrageous. He looks so – the fact that he did he do the kickoff?
Yes.
So he missed the kick, and then every other field goal that he took all game long was just completely nails. Blows my mind.
All right. Elijah Griffin commits to Georgia. Big news on Friday. You had been telling everyone at Dogs 24/7 that this was coming. Georgia was in good shape. What do you think made the difference for Georgia, and what is Georgia getting in 5-star Elijah Griffin?
If you were to pick one recruitment that Georgia just couldn't afford to lose this recruiting cycle, this is the one. Elijah Griffin, 5-star defensive lineman from Savannah Christian. If you see him right now, you will think that he's already an NFL defensive lineman. That's the way that he looks. He is built like all of the great ones that Georgia has had come through. And quite frankly, he's been built that way for a long time. I've talked to this high school coach who, when Elijah was in 6th grade, he was already hearing as the high school coach that Elijah was a better looking defensive lineman than anybody that they had at that point in time, all the way up to their senior class. And so he's been good for a really, really long time. And I think that is why Georgia won out in this, because he was someone that Georgia knew about very early on. He was, the 8th grade offer, the number 1 recruit, the number 1 defensive lineman, the guy that was Georgia's top target from freshman year all the way through senior year. As we talked about on previous podcasts recently, he took his official visit for his birthday for the Mississippi State game. All of this was a formality. And, I wrote a little bit about it at Dogs 24/7, and you can read more in depth about the specifics behind it all. But, this was a decision that he really made to the Georgia coaching staff in January. And this was something where he articulated to them, I want to be here. I want to go through the process my way. I want to check out some places that I just never in my wildest dreams imagined that I was going to get to go see. He's like, but I want you to know. And this was a speech that he gave to Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann and Trey Scott in their office on a visit that he was at in January, and basically let them know this is where I'm going to be. And it took all the way until, toward the end of October for it to happen. But this is just a massive, massive pickup. Really helps fortify Georgia's defensive line in this recruiting class. And I know the question that everybody asks whenever I talk about Elijah Griffin, what does this mean about Justice Terry? Because they're the 2 5-star defensive linemen in the state, and everybody's wanted to know where they're going to be for a long, long time. I think that Elijah's decision is one that that it's going to influence Justice Terry, but it is a important tea leaf that to help you understand Georgia is not going to let these 2 5-star defensive linemen out of the state. It's interesting that we're talking about Justice Terry on that as well, because he was in Austin today visiting Texas for the game. I saw him actually over at game day this morning, hanging out with some of Texas's commits. But Elijah Griffin, there is not enough positive comments that I can say about Elijah Griffin as a player. And I will, I think normally when people say, oh, he's a better person than player, it's usually like, he's not that good of a player. I want to talk about how great of Elijah Griffin is as a player, because all of my interactions with him, I've come in on a couple of their practices at the end and their workouts at the end at Savannah Christian, where he is in as good of a team leader and voice in a locker room as just about any high school kid that I've ever heard, and his ability to articulate his thoughts to a group of people. You can even tell little things like in my commitment stories and in some of the answers that he gave, just talking about his decision. You can tell that he is a pro. He is advanced in the way that he thinks about things, that is on the field, that is off the field. I think that all of that, everything that I could say about Elijah Griffin is why he was a can't miss for Georgia, and why also they were never going to miss on him in the first place.
Make sure, if you haven't already, we have a 50% off sale right now. Get all the intel on Elijah Griffin's commitment from Ben. He did an outstanding job covering that commitment. And there's going to be more to come. So subscribe and get ready, because we got not only all this recruiting going on, but basically another half of this football season. And Georgia's well positioned now after beating number 1 Texas in Austin as they continue to chase a spot in that 12-team playoff that we'll see later this year. Well, we are going to wrap it up right there. I appreciate everyone who watched this live, everyone who is watching or listening after the fact. Again, subscribe to Dogs 24/7. We got that 50% off sale going on right now. Go to our YouTube, go to our TikTok. Got a lot of content there. Well, we're going to get out of here. I know we got busy days tomorrow, getting back to the Peach State and getting ready for a nice little break of a bye week. But we'll have a lot of content for you guys and some more podcasts as well. So we'll end it right there. For Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.